Yeah.
And so I told my boss, I'm working from home today. And apparently the city was fine. I work at SU and the city was actually plowed and clear, which is highly
Which means it
unusual.
didn't snow.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Did we find Keith?
I was working on a different problem.
I can see him in the panelist list, so it does look like he got the link.
Okay. You guys can get started and
We'll just
Yeah.
go live at some.
And the people online.
All right, are we ready to get started?
Yeah, we're gonna start with introductions.
Okay.
Just to kind of keep everybody on the, since we're a split group, it's a little more confusing. So we also have a couple of new people in the room that we want to say hi to, so.
Okay.
So I'm Sarah Wall-Bollinger, and I am a co-chair of the Comprehensive Planning and Steering Committee.
Hi, my name is Heather Waters, and I am a town councilor and also co-chair of the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee.
I'm Rick Hall. Bobby Shep, Village of Manila trustee.
Hi, I'm Marissa Mims. I'm a member of the FM Board of Education. I live in the Village of Manlius.
I'm Paul Byrne. I live in the Village of Manlius.
I'm Leah Kraus. I'm the assistant director at Fayetteville Free Library.
Don Gates, Village of Manlius resident.
And then I think we've got Carrie. Carrie, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Carrie Catalino. I am on the board at Wellwood HSA, and I work at a mental health OCs school, and I live in the town of Manlius.
Is Nicole here? Did she get on?
I'm here. Nicole
Go
Pataki.
ahead.
Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay, Nicole Pataki. I live in the town of Manlius, and I'm a small business owner in Fayetteville.
Anybody else on the Zoom before we get to our facilitators? All right, then I'd like to introduce the people at our table here because not everybody has met you yet. So Susie, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Susie. I'm the assistant to our town supervisor. Allison Weber, town clerk.
John Deere, town supervisor of Memphis.
Okay, Grace, back to you.
All right, and many of you already know me. I'm Grace DeSantis. I'm a community planner with Barton and LaJudas, helping the town of Manlius pull together this comprehensive plan. Keith?
Hey, how you doing, everybody? I'm Keith Ewald, working with Grace and a couple of our colleagues, also community planner and landscape architect with the firm.
All right. So tonight we have a couple of different items in store for you all. We're going to start off with a process update. There's been a lot of additional outreach going on and a lot of upcoming outreach events in the works. So we'll cover some of those. We're also going to review the draft vision and policy areas. We sent out that workbook, I think on Friday, but we'll also review that and then we'll get some of your feedback by doing some online polling. And then we'll close the meeting today by talking about some next steps and what you can expect in the coming months. So in terms of process, as we mentioned at the last meeting, the town of Manlius was awarded a Climate Smart Communities grant. And so we have reworked this timeline here to include some of those components and reflect some new objectives that will be worked into the comprehensive plan. So those line items in green are some additional components that we haven't discussed before. So we'll be starting to kick off a zoning code assessment here in the spring. And then in the summer, we'll be completing a build out analysis. And then we will also be incorporating climate action plan recommendations in the community development strategy. So again, those are new items. So this timeline might look a little bit different than the last time you saw it, but we're really trying to reflect the findings from the ongoing climate action plan and the comprehensive plan and make sure that those two documents really merge seamlessly throughout the development of this plan. And right now we are in the spring of 2022 at the draft vision and policy framework right here. So we've been working at this for about a year. We have about a year to go. In terms of community outreach, there have been several different focus groups and workshops completed to date. On the slide, these are the 14 outreach activities that have been completed to date. So we've gotten a lot of incredible feedback, not only from the steering committee, but also from members of the public by facilitating a public workshop, doing a community survey, and then all of these different focus groups, which are facilitated either by the BNL team or by you guys, the steering committee members. And I just want to acknowledge that this has been just a fantastic effort in getting community outreach. And especially as we were working on developing that draft vision policies and objectives section, we relied heavily on the input received through these focus group sessions that the steering committee pulled together. So those have been extremely helpful so far, and we're going to continue to review the findings from these focus groups as we move into developing action items as well. Looking forward, there are a couple of additional topics planned for focus group sessions or study groups. So first on the list is a stormwater study group. This will take place virtually on April 20th and May 17th, both at 6:30 p.m. There's also a quarry study group planned, also virtual, and those will take place on April 26th at 6:30 and May 24th at 6:30. We also have in the works a sidewalks and greenways focus group session. This is tentatively scheduled for May 4th, but we are still finalizing that date at this time. And then also in the works is an Indigenous peoples listening session as well. So stay tuned for those. We'll have more information coming out, particularly about the sidewalks and greenways focus group and the Indigenous peoples listening session as we get closer to finalizing those plans. And then there also are several other outreach opportunities going on, which could serve well for opportunities to raise awareness about this comprehensive plan and get people involved. So Earth Fest is happening on April 30th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the Fayetteville Free Library. Hope for Heather Teal Ribbon Run is occurring on May 14th at 10 a.m. There will be a comprehensive plan update on Fremont, Minoa, and Kirkville on June 14th at 6:30 p.m. And then the 4th of July parade and celebration is also another opportunity to spread awareness about the comprehensive plan and get folks engaged. Okay. Any questions so far on updated timeline and outreach to date before we move forward?
There's also the Memorial Day parades in Fayetteville, Manlius.
Oh, that's right.
We were, last year we were encouraged. We did want to get the survey out, but given the nature of it being a Memorial Day parade, it's really been, it was really, we were discouraged from sort of promoting anything, even though it was just community information. I understand. And it took away, we didn't want to take away from the one thing that's not so just to give you that information, but we want to Grace update Fremont to take one of those E's off. When you get
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Little
no
typo.
Worries. No problem. And also I know the Village of Minoa is doing field days in June, I believe.
Yep,
so
June 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, I believe.
So we can
It's
add
that
those.
first weekend.
Yeah, and that's a big festival. That's a great time to more. Also, maybe if we think about how we want to get the message out, maybe even t-shirts.
Well, they're gonna have a parade on the last night too, so I will find out who's in charge of the parade and I will give you their contact so you can talk to them.
Guess what? We're gonna work with you to do that too, if you're open to it.
I won't be at the parade. I will be at Paul McCartney that night.
Oh. That sounds great. No argument.
Yeah, we don't question that.
My sister's working the dome that night, so she's pretty excited.
Yeah, you'll be.
Yeah. Thanks, Grace.
All right. So into the vision and policy areas. At our last meeting, we reviewed the vision and policy framework. So I just want to provide another brief overview of that before we move forward and get into the weeds. Thank you all for filling out those workbooks. They were super helpful as we were drafting the section. Actually, what we did was take all of your written feedback and spoken feedback from the breakout sessions, compile your comments, find out where there were synergies, and we directly used the feedback through those avenues to develop this draft vision, policy, and objectives framework. We also cross-checked that with all of the public input summaries to make sure that we weren't missing any input from the community there as well. So this framework covers the vision, policy, and objectives section. We will be covering action items in the coming months. So don't be surprised if you feel like we aren't covering anything specific enough at this time. Action items are really those specific programs and projects that you want to see implemented, and we will be developing those in the coming months. But for now, we have developed the vision, policy, and objectives, and we want to just make sure we are set with those before we move forward and get into the nitty-gritty with action items. So our draft vision statement, as you might have seen, is on this screen, and I'll just read it off and then we can get your thoughts on that. So the draft vision statement that we have so far is, as a community with several village and hamlet areas, the town of Manlius is recognized for inspiring collaboration, operating with a regional lens, and proactively planning for the future. Looking forward, we aspire to maintain attainable and attractive living options for current and future residents, foster an environment that welcomes and supports local businesses, provide exceptional opportunities for recreation and the enjoyment of our community, and continually improve the overall quality of life of our residents. Furthermore, we intend to build a sustainable future for our community by engaging in environmental stewardship for the protection of our natural resources and by promoting the inclusion of all resident voices in our community's decision-making processes. So, looking back again, this is the draft vision statement. Underneath this statement fall several different policy areas, and underneath those, several objectives as well. So before we move on, we will have opportunity to provide written comment on the draft vision statement, but while we're all here as a group, I do want to open it up for conversation and see if any of you had some thoughts at this time on the draft vision statement that you want to bring up and discuss with the group.
I actually have a couple questions.
Okay.
It says, encouraging smart growth within the existing hamlets of Fremont and Kirkville. What do you mean by the smart growth? I mean, because Fremont to me seems very developed already.
Right.
But so you jumped a little ahead,
Yeah,
right?
that's what I
Oh,
said.
okay.
Well, let's
All
do
right.
that.
Sorry, no.
Nothing on vision yet.
Oh.
That's on my, like, that was on my.
I had that question too, so I'm glad you brought that up.
Because I'm like, we don't have enough like sewer access to like, you know,
Right,
for
right.
Kirkville and things for that growth. So I'm on like the same wavelength with you there.
Well, sorry, I skipped that.
No, good.
Vision. I got a question about this.
Sure.
Okay.
So this is only a draft, correct?
Mhm.
So let's
That is
say from the outside, so this will continually, the wording can change a little bit. It's, this is
Yeah.
not in stone. So if I show this to people,
Yeah.
you just say, hey, what do you think? Is there a word you would change?
Mhm.
We're still in that phase.
For
That's
like
all I want
2 or
to.
3 more months.
Okay, that's great. So we still got 2 or 3 or 4 months to get this back, because I could see some people reacting to
Yeah.
certain things, because but anyways, that's all.
Right. So it's like a live document right now. Okay.
And in fact, you're
going to get a writable document. Perfect. That's awesome.
There was an option as to whether or not we sort of did this in this session or taking the workbooks and everything that BNL has ever done with any community, they thought they could put something for us to pick apart and work with. So hearing that we had that option, does this feel reflective to you of some of the things we've been talking about in the process? And
I think this is good. The only thing I would say is like number 4 concerns me. That's almost like your first sentence. And then, because that's a general statement, the other 3 are specific. I mean, the other 3 are quality life things. So I think if I was reading this, I'd be like, wait.
you're defining quality of life.
Right. I almost feel like that should be the first sentence of the draft, is that we want a quality we want to improve the overall quality of life. This is why we're doing the comprehensive plan.
So looking forward, we aspire to continually improve the overall quality of life of our residents by maintaining blah, blah, blah.
And so to piggyback off of that, I would then also include, I would like us to lead off with something about the inclusion of all residents' voices. And
Yeah.
this is because I think that's just kind of like opening up, like, welcome, like, we want everyone.
But I think this is great as a starting point. And, yeah, so it's all.
It's not like the grabber, right? Like,
Yeah, but I feel like that
those-
fourth one is either your first sentence or your last sentence, but the other three are details and the fourth one's a general statement. You're specifically calling out recreation, local business, living options, and those three seem like quality of life items to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I like that there's distinctive differences between each of the areas in our town. So I don't know if we could even add that part, like with a diverse region, like I don't even, it's not regional because we're talking like even smaller in terms, but that we have a greater overall community, but with each having our own.
So maybe as a community with several distinct village and hamlet areas.
Correct, like I think that because it's very distinct and different, less we're all unifying as a town. However, like we've said many times before, like Kirkville is very different than even Fremont within the same district, so.
And I think also, you got me thinking is, and I think you guys brought it up at the beginning, that we sort of forget about the agricultural component.
Right.
And we really, and I think it's nice that I think I saw it, maybe it was later on I saw it, but maybe that even needs to be brought out here.
Yeah.
Especially because we want to keep that, it's such an important resource.
So engagement in environmental stewardship for the protection of our agricultural and natural resources.
Yeah.
Yeah, or that could even be the fourth one, but I'm also just going to her point about showing the diversity of the town of Manly, since you might even want to say it up in the beginning, several village, agricultural, hamlet areas.
That's what
So-
I'm getting at, right? Like
Yeah,
the
yeah, you made me think of it,
distinct differences, like, With like, I don't know, we're all part of the town, however, like, we're still distinct and it's like many unique voices, we come together as one.
And you want to make sure they're always being respected and heard, that
Yep.
each of those communities being heard, the agricultural as well as each of the villages.
Yeah, distinct village, agricultural and hamlet areas, yeah.
I really like seeing inclusion as a part of the vision statement, but I wonder if the way that it's worded now concerns me a little, or I wonder if there's room for, I'd like to, like, talking about including all residents' voices is good and important, but I feel like something about being welcoming would be nice to add. Is kind of a little bit of a different point. We can include everyone who's here, but we also want to be welcoming to
new people. Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
I mean, there's this concept of, I don't think we really thought of ourselves, ever talked about the community as a place for visitors and residents. We don't think of it as a destination for people to come and spend time in our recreational areas. We think of it as a residential community in so many ways, don't we? So that's a distinctive thing to think about. And anything that's here is going to have some goals around it in terms of action steps. So.
And I think that that's, you know, in terms of a business opportunity as well, is that tourism and visitors is actually one of the things we have. I mean, I don't know how many thousand people come to Green Lakes every year. So having some awareness of the fact that we are a tourism location in a way is also something to think about, that it's not just people that are here all year round. There's people who come here and maybe not necessarily in this vision here, but somewhere later, I think, to reflect that.
Yeah, I think they could go right into your commerce area.
Yeah.
The fish stock event that that the town of Manlius Recreation Department led on with Green Lakes had over 400 kids.
That was
And-
incredible.
Yeah.
I heard
and
from the parks guy.
it was so great.
That's awesome.
And the kids were coming from all over. There were kids from the Syracuse Boys and Girls Club, people from all over the neighborhood, lots of intergenerational activity with grandparents bringing kids. So it was, that's a good example. That if our recreation department in the town is actually providing something that is a drawing in Wicked Woods, we know people come from all over, all that. So
So would you say something, just going back to what you're saying, in the inclusion, so it almost like be welcoming, So is that what you're trying to capture when you say welcoming is to
Yeah,
like outside
I was
people, or are you
think-
saying welcoming?
I
Just
wasn't
saying welcoming
thinking
all
as
types
much
of
from
people.
the tourism
That's what I was wondering.
perspective. I was thinking more of just welcoming to
All types of people.
And maybe I was thinking more along the lines of newcomers, even I was thinking maybe more residential, but both are, you know, considerations. I don't know how to word it, how to wordsmith.
No,
it
I think that's why
perfectly.
we have this conversation. Somebody comes up with the wordsmith.
Right,
afterwards.
right.
Yes,
But I
and
think
we
that-
will also be providing a link so you all can collaborate and comment on the draft vision statement and policies and objectives. So this is great. We wanted to give you something to react to. So I'm glad that we have a lot of feedback right off the bat, and we'll definitely be providing another draft of this. But in terms of like specific words you want to see, we'll pass around a link so everybody can in a collaborative way, provide comments on this in written form as well.
Okay, now, is now when we learn our new skill? Where we get to learn how to use our tool?
Oh, the polling?
Yeah.
Yes, we're just about there. Do you have any other comments on the vision statement that we want to discuss as a group, or are we ready to move on to policy areas? All right, we'll move on. So we have developed 6 policy areas for this draft section. They are environmental protection and sustainability, community identity and quality of life, welcoming and healthy neighborhoods. I'm happy to hear somebody bring up the word welcoming, because we do address that in one of the policy areas. Diverse and local commerce, responsive government operations, and modern transportation networks. So these do largely follow the 6 topic areas that we had in the goals workbook from our last steering committee meeting. We kind of tweaked the titles of them a bit just to kind of demonstrate the types of themes that came out of those different policy areas. And we do have a statement for each policy area that's similar in structure to the vision statement, but specific to each policy area. We're not going to review those, brief policy statements, but when we pass around the link for you to provide written comments, please take a look at those policy statements and provide your feedback on those as well. Today, we will be using a polling software to collect your feedback on the objectives that we have drafted for each policy area. So now we get to try out this neat tool. It's an online polling software called Poll Everywhere. So you'll see this URL up on the screen, pollev.com/GraceDeSantis875. So if you could navigate to that address on your mobile device or computer or tablet, whatever you have on you. And then on the screen, once you go through, you should see it just says waiting for my presentation to begin. So through this online polling software, we're going to provide several questions for you to answer as a group. And as you provide your answers, they'll populate in in real time on the screen in front of you. So we'll be able to use your responses to kind of generate some conversation with the group and direct our conversation as well. So we'll have some multiple choice questions and open-ended questions. With the multiple choice questions, you'll be asked to choose which 3 objectives for each policy area you consider the most favorable or highest priority. So make sure you choose all 3 that you would rate the highest. And then again, once everybody's submitting their answers, we'll kind of get a collective score of the highest rated 3 pop up on the screen. And then we'll also have an open-ended question for each policy area, just to collect your feedback on if you feel like we're missing any important objectives. And you will be able to vote on other steering committees' responses there as well. So if you feel like somebody submitted an objective idea that you think is really important, you can like it. And then we'll see that reflected in real time on the screen in front of us. And lastly, if you have any issues with the website loading, if it's not showing the correct question on the screen, just click the refresh button and that should get you where you need to be. Did anyone have trouble accessing this Poll Everywhere site, or do you have any questions? All right, we'll start then. And just interject if you feel like you're encountering any issue, and we'll try to correct that. So the first policy area we'll talk about today is the environmental protection and sustainability policy area. So on the screen here and on your device as well, you should see each of the 6 objectives that we've drafted for this policy area. And you can vote on the 3 that you consider to be the highest priority or the ones that you favor the most. If you don't have access to internet, you can also text in for this question. So there's some instructions on the top of the screen there if you would prefer to text your answers in. And again, these are all draft objectives. So if there's a specific wording of one of these objectives that you don't like, definitely reflect that in the Adobe PDF file that we'll be sending around for you all to comment directly on. So it's looking like protect and grow our network of natural, open, and agricultural spaces is being rated the highest at this time, followed by improving the health of our natural resources by mitigating harmful practices and implementing appropriate resource protection regulations. It looks like, let's see, support our community in transitioning away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy resources is rated one of the lowest, and spreading public awareness as well. So I'd be interested to hear from you all why you might have rated growing our network of natural and open spaces the highest, or why you might not have chosen public awareness as one of your priority objectives, or renewable energy resources, one of your priority objectives. If anyone would like to share out on why they rated the way they did.
We can only choose 3, right? So this is really reflecting just 3 choices.
Yes.
It's hard to decide which of the 3, because if you found like a 4th one, there was no way to rate them. Like, let's say if you could say this is the most important, then this is the most important. Because I just find it ironic that F is the highest one,
Right.
but yet you might end up with a dirty, polluted, open space.
Yeah, you're right. Like you couldn't like Likert spare, right?
Right, or
Like-
you could end up with just corn being grown in an agricultural space, let's just
Yeah.
say, you know, so I think that's what's hard about this, but it's interesting to see.
I think it'd be interesting to see what how they interpreted the question.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, when I looked at protect and grow our network of natural and open agricultural space, I was just thinking about, you know, protecting the farm areas and keeping lots of open green spaces. That was immediate, that vision came to my mind. That's what I was thinking about. And then the health of our natural resources was another one of my choices, because I think that's key to protecting our green spaces. So for me, it was like looking at things that kind of went together. And my 3rd one was actually the support our community in transition away from fossil fuels. I just feel that that's something that we can do as a community to, and it's important that we all start doing that. But the public awareness one, I feel as though that's a part of the others, right? That's what you would do with the others.
I think, I mean, from village to the town board, I think everybody's doing a good job already of public awareness. And you go on any political page or any town page, or village page, you see them sharing all this information already. So that's why I didn't vote, because I think we're already doing a good job at opening up and letting people know what's going on, what they can do.
So my question then is, do you feel like this still needs to be included as an objective, spreading public awareness, or do you feel like it warrants being removed from this policy area?
I think it should still be there, because one of my suggestions when I did this in my workbook was to maybe facilitate, whether it's through the Recs department or some through the libraries or stuff, would be like green initiatives in terms of like how to grow your own garden, how to do like sustainability from like ground level, in my opinion, would be like, and that goes into the public awareness and education component of it, or even let's do a raised bed kind of garden one-on-one. I'm not great with like, I don't have a green thumb, my husband does, and they know instinctively where to put things. Like, for me, I would enjoy going to something like that for the kids, because I consider us very like green and, crunchy, so to speak, like, but I don't have the natural hack for it that other people do. And the other thing that I rated highly was fostering a culture of reduce, reuse, repair, recycle, because I feel like that's something that the town should have like oversight and can have control over. So that's why I did that. And then obviously like protect and grow our network was another one of my high ones, just because we use the green space in terms of the state parks. But also it's important to keep our agriculture agricultural,
Okay.
And I don't think that necessarily the town's domain should be like, I think state and county would be more of reducing the carbon footprint in terms of bonds with smart acts and enacting like lowering diesel fuel and those kind of regulations. I don't know that that in my mind is necessarily a domain that should be part of the town vision, but that's rhetoric and that's how someone might read into it.
I also think that the challenge for both the village and the town governments is getting people to go on to the page, right? I mean, and people are on all the time. It's not all these old people like me don't go on the computer and they don't look it up. But do I go on the village website? Do I go on the town website? Because you can put all kinds of content. If no one goes to look, it didn't do you any good. So how do we make that attractive? How do we make it so people periodically, whether that's daily, weekly, monthly, are going on those websites and seeing stuff that is put on there to try to educate them and to, foster some of these things we're trying to do? I don't have a good answer.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think regarding the public awareness, I think we can always do better. I think it's come so far in terms of what people do. But I just think in terms of we're with the stormwater study group, and I mean, people rake leaves into the street constantly. That's so, and I think you also take like Save the Rain. The city has done a wonderful, or the county, they had that as a campaign. I don't think we ever want to underestimate spreading public awareness, because I don't think the public's even aware of everything the government is doing. And what I mean by is local government. So I think that should always be an objective, to always be raising awareness. And what I liked was in other parts of the document, it was called out, how do we be more transparent? How do we communicate with groups? So I think that is important, to raise public awareness and to get people to know to go look at the webpage, right? I think you're absolutely right. I'm guilty of that.
But even if we go back to old school, as we said a few times with the Eagle Bulletin, and have like a little corner, like instead of like Dear Abby, like here's our little snippet of ways we can reduce, reuse, recycle, or, because I still like, I'm fairly like young, middle-aged, and I still go to the paper version a lot of the times just because I know I like that. We use that.
Public awareness is your audience. So where you're gonna get the younger people, where you're gonna get the kids, where you're gonna, it's gonna have to be a lot of different sources that you reach out to, whether it's social media or the papers, or I don't know if you want to listen to the radio anymore too much. Wherever people are getting it based on the demographic. And also in terms of diversity and inclusion, we also should think about languages and accessibility and things, and making sure that those are included.
Yeah, we have information from the census that tells us what's being spoken in the town. So
I was just going to share one quick thing. It was something I learned last summer regarding supporting our communities transitioning from fossil fuels. That might be a competitive advantage. I just happened to be in Detroit. Happened to be around a couple of people who were high up in the car industry. And one thing they said is that there's going to become a point where it's just going to suddenly tip. We're going to go from gas to electric like this. And so the communities that are over here are going to be ahead. And I thought that was fascinating. And then I asked another friend of mine who happened to be part of that conversation, who works for National Grid and is very familiar with utilities. And his point was, because I said, well, then gas is going to get really cheap because there's going to be abundance. He goes, no, what's going to happen is nobody's going to be able to afford to maintain the gas lines because nobody's going to be using gas. So the gas is going to become much more expensive. So I thought, just in terms of forward looking, I think it's not bad after hearing that conversation. It gives you a competitive advantage and a marketing advantage.
making sure that our
Tourists.
charging infrastructure is like absolutely ready to roll for the demand, for the, but yeah.
A lot of us can't afford that upfront cost, at least like, I mean, we're not looking at thousands and thousands of dollars to have the infrastructure in our house to be able to like charge a vehicle to transport all the kids. I mean, we have grant money and rebates and, you know, smart bonds for that, awesome, but.
But if you have it within the community, you make it possible for people to
Right.
put that in. Now it becomes attractive to live here if you do have one of those kind of cars or whatever.
It's gonna head that way, so it's just us just looking.
I think I
Or new
remember-
construction, making sure that you include that kind of the right voltage, you know, as part of the zoning.
The other thing I remember too is you said the word infrastructure. You gotta make sure National Grid's ready to be able to
Ready to
handle
handle
this.
it, right.
'Cause what happens when it's 6 o'clock at night, everybody comes home, plugs their cars in, and now you have no power. Heat
Plug in at work.
your house or whatever you gotta do. I
So,
mean,
yeah.
So that's it, like you said, you gotta make sure National Grid's ready for it too.
Well, one of the things that the green, that's one of the reasons that I think that's really interesting to think about. The state is looking at what the industry says is gonna happen, and they're trying to organize the Green New Deal at the state level to kind of have this work. So aligning with what we know is coming down, they're always gonna be slightly behind. But the other thing is there are gonna be industries that pop up to do that in between. There are gonna be industries that pop up to help us convert our cars. They're gonna, like, all these things are gonna start coming. So I think that us just being committed to knowing that there is gonna be this massive shift is going to be ahead of the game. But also thinking about the fact that the mobility and the transportation pieces as we come through, that's another part of it. Like some people may actually make choices to, it's too expensive to have 2 gas cars. We can afford 1 EV. We're gonna change the way we commute. We're gonna change.
But that's a perfect segue. Let's move on.
Yes.
We got 6 more to go.
Let's do it. Let's vote.
So you can, if you want, submit written answers here, but if it's easier just to discuss in person, we can do that. Do you feel like there is anything missing from this objective area? Anything glaring? If it's something minor, you know, we can catch that in the written comments, but did you feel like there was an entire objective that we just missed in this section? I'm seeing no.
The only thing I would say is I'm just thinking in terms of the stormwater, that it's not really called out as specific, but we do have a study group going. And that's why, again, this is all draft still, right?
Yep,
So
that's correct.
and that's something that I could always just submit later, or we as a stormwater committee could make a recommendation.
The stormwater
Okay.
will only make a recommendation.
Yeah, okay, good. So we don't have to worry about getting it.
And there's credits that can be applied to specifically out of the Climate Smart Communities program too. I was going to suggest that also, Grace, that maybe we add, you know, a stormwater option or component or some type of language in the policy area somewhere.
Okay, that's a great idea.
And for full disclosure, I was playing along with the game as well, but then I figured I should probably delete my answer so it didn't skew the results.
All right, the second policy area is community identity and quality of life. So this is the same, just vote for your top 3. And then we can take a look at the one that's rated the lowest and kind of discuss whether that objective should be removed or changed. And then we'll again talk about whether there is something missing from this section. It's looking like family-friendly atmosphere is being rated really high. Same with embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion. Providing a high level of public service is being rated really high. I would be interested why nobody is selecting the internet coverage objective. Maybe that could be moved in as an action item.
I just don't think that's something that is widely considered to be an issue in this community.
Okay.
And I'm missing something. Are there areas that we don't have?
We only have like
high-speed-
one option. So where I used to live, we had Fios. Now I only have Spectrum.
Where is
and
this at?
right off of Kirkville Road, like we're
Okay.
right almost, you know, Manoa, Kirkville area, and your only option is Spectrum, and it's it's pretty slow, especially like we've got 5 kids, you know, and so when we were back at hybrid learning, it was like, eek, eek, you know, it was painful. You know,
We just had Windstream come to the neighborhood.
oh, well, lucky
Call
you.
service.
I feel like it's such a monopoly, you know, like if we had another option, it would be good, but literally no other option.
But as opposed to other communities where there really are dark spots.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah,
true.
areas
Right. I
pretty
mean,
well covered.
So that's good to know. It sounds like maybe there's some wordsmithing that we should consider for that objective, or maybe it could be covered in an action item instead.
Yeah, I was thinking that could just go under government response or it could be under high level of public services. I would almost say the internet is a public service.
Now it is.
We still haven't
Yeah.
accepted that, but it really should be.
Because we're thinking, if we think about it as just connecting your computers, it's one thing, but the hybrid learning showed us that the Internet of Things, all our new connected things, talking to each other, taking up bandwidth
And it's
too,
all-
there's so much more to come.
And it's also a commerce advantage. If you can say to a small business, you don't have to worry about the internet, it's provided. But
So maybe it's not under community identity and quality of life.
yeah.
Maybe it's
yeah,
under commerce or.
or structure,
Government,
whatever
right.
that, government operations.
Okay, we can do that. And then did you feel like anything was missing from this policy area that you want to discuss today? An objective that was just not there that should have been? Or if there was an objective that you disagree with and feel like should be removed? And if not, that's fine.
I think there'll be time for specifics, like when you talk about quality of life for, I lost the piece they had it for high school kids and teenagers, which I think is a huge issue. Somebody brought that up as, that would come out later, right? In one of the action items.
Yes, so action items are specific programs and projects that you want to see put in place. The objectives are really just, you want to see something promoted or something increased or decreased.
Grace, I do think if you could just make a note though, because the teens and young adult population has come up a few in like different places. It's not just one place. So let's make sure we circle around and find a place for that to go.
Or could we fuse those two with the young and then also the aged? I think that represents the demographic. I just really think it's important. It's not just youth-based because we do have a pretty significant senior population. I feel strongly about like representing both ends of the spectrum. So rather than being two separate things, like let's just make it all encompassing. We don't have to say like one versus the other. How about?
I think it's also like one way that we can fit in, I think, with school aged and like the school systems, and tell me what you both think from your Board of Education perspectives, but this idea of transitioning into school age now. So if you're somebody that's transitioning away from school and you're in the community, or transitioning into school, or transitioning into the community, but this idea of transitioning, it seems like something that we would want to make sure we understood, because it would require we're requiring cooperation with different government entities in that.
Are you talking about people moving into the community, or are you talking about kids coming into school and leaving school?
I'm thinking
Like
specifically
leaving school
about,
versus
I'm thinking specifically about an 18-year-old or 21-year-old who is leaving the school district and is living in the community, and they're maybe a person with disabilities in that transition period, and how they live and work versus when they were living and working as a school person, like somebody going to school in the community. Suddenly they're living in the community, or a person who's going from being a commuter to suddenly retiring in the community. Like how you spend your time in the community is changing. That's the thing I'm trying to understand how it fits or how we characterize it. Or someone who's just arrived, navigating.
I mean, the first thing that actually came to my mind when you talk about transitions is being able to keep people here, right? So when people transition, like when they retire, are they going to transition out of our community, out of New York State?
Retaining residents.
Yeah, so that's actually the first thing that came to my mind when you said that. And as far as like when kids leave school, I mean, that is a good point. Not every kid's going to go to college, and we would like to try to keep some kids, if they want to work, living in this community. So I think there's something that we can do there. I'm not quite sure what though, and to work with all those different groups.
Yeah.
And some of that might also be covered underneath the neighborhood section as well.
Well, if you're gonna have kids leaving school, you need jobs.
Right.
And they can't just be retail, they can't be going to work at Chipotle,
So who can afford
right?
to
That's
work
not
there?
gonna sustain them, so they've gotta, there's gotta be commerce here.
We'll hire him at the highway department.
Right.
John and I were talking about that the other night.
And then the other question would be, you know, as people retire, are they leaving because they don't like town of Manlius and they're not getting what they want? Which I would say is probably 1%, or are they leaving because of the New York taxes, which is
Right.
99%.
Can't afford to.
And we can't make this place nice enough to put up with that level of taxes if that's the opinion that that person has.
Yeah, the weather.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that we can control.
But it's also the idea of people who have that mobility and have that ability to live somewhere else and live here too, or thinking about wanting to stay here, but they have to move somewhere else that's closer to family. But the retaining people for as long as we can, I guess, is the idea. Is, yeah, interesting. Carrie and Nicole and anyone who's online, you know, you're welcome to jump in. We can hear you at any time, not pushing you, just letting you know. We can hear you perfectly.
And I am going to move on to the next question just to make sure we do get through all of these today. The third policy area was welcoming and healthy neighborhoods. And I think some of our conversation from the previous policy area might kind of carry over to this one as well. This only had 4 objectives, which is fine. But as we've discussed in the other 2, if you feel like something is missing, either let me know or provide that in the written comments. So we're seeing diverse housing options being rated pretty high.
Well, Grace, I think smart growth is actually a lingo term, and nobody knew what you meant.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't want to grow out there.
So smart growth would entail encouraging growth in already existing areas that are developing rather than kind of encouraging sprawl outward into your like natural areas or agricultural areas. So that just entails supporting existing, you know, neighborhood areas that are already existing versus allowing, you know, commercial and residential development outside of existing neighborhood centers.
And sometimes you think of it as infill. So instead of building a whole new street, is to build a house in the vacant lot on the street that's already there.
Right.
That's only for, and it's not saying we need growth there. It's saying when growth is going to happen.
Yes, that's correct.
Tapping into sewers.
Yes.
Then I would 100% go for that. I would like a sewer.
That's also good feedback on the word smart growth, because we definitely don't have to use that term also. You know, we can change that and just describe it in a different way.
I think that's what I learned, is that we need to just change that sentence, because
That was misleading. Like, even though
it made it sound like we wanted to grow Fremont.
Yes, 100%. And we're like, we're already at capacity, and Fremont especially, there's no room for.
Yeah. And if you go a little bit more this way, it's just wet.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
I think it's just important, like, you have a lot of people that don't want to necessarily see a lot of those agricultural acreage turned to multi-plot, like mini neighborhoods. There's, you know, and that is town control based on how it's, you know, deemed. So I think we have to be careful how it's read.
And the planning board, already our code does include some focus on, John, you're nodding, what is it called? What do we call cluster developments versus, like, already we have a little bit of a bias towards denser
Yeah,
developments
places
versus
where there's
sprawl.
already infrastructure to hook into rather than having to run new water lines.
Yeah, and then keeping the green space green around the edges of the neighborhood. So,
Did we feel like anything was missing from this policy area?
I think there's something here that we should say about neighborhoods adjacent to commercial or industrial areas, the rail yard, things like they somehow or other to recognize, to minimize the negative impact on a residential community of some commercial activity.
Right.
Having buffering, something like that.
You can hear the train, you can't do anything by hearing the train.
But it-
But I think mixed use is also important, is that you don't want to have all residential in one place and all business somewhere else.
Well, actually, maybe I wrote it wrong, but I wrote that. I think, at least, no bias, is I'd like to get away from where we promote neighborhoods that are all large lots with large homes, that we develop a more diverse neighborhoods. So, because otherwise we end up with income segregation. And then you end up with cliques in high schools. I'm imagining FM, still relatively new, but I think that would be great. That would promote more of a neighborhood and a sense of community. But I think, especially in Manlius, you do get this segregation by income.
Sure.
And so anyways, that's what I meant by mixed use housing.
You're gonna have a developer who's gonna come in and he has a market for this, but you're gonna tell him he has to do that.
Why
There
not?
was,
Yeah, but why wouldn't they? There's a shortage of affordable housing. If we can't figure that out, this isn't a place I'd want to live. You know, I agree with what you're saying. I used to work with developers on the West Coast. I completely get the profit motive, but I also say if you create the opportunity, people, I mean, look at it in the city. They can't build enough housing for young people in the city.
So,
The thing is too, though, is that the last time the Village of Fable had a project proposed done at the O'Brien Gear Factory, FM sent a letter stating that they did not want a project like this because they couldn't accommodate that much of an influx of students, so.
A little more diplomatic about it. What and that is something that needs to be considered when all these developments are spoken about, is the schools and how much the space, because that was a legitimate issue.
Well,
You
no,
know, you
I'm
have
not
like
disagreeing.
lots of kids coming in, what schools are you gonna be going to? Because we don't have overflow buildings right now. We don't have buildings where there are lots of spaces for kids. So in terms of long-term planning, I like what you're saying about affordable housing, but that needs to be planned in terms of, okay, if we want to put this here, then we need to look at, okay, what do we need to do with our schools? Do we need more space in our schools? I think one thing, and maybe it's just coming up later, and it just came to my mind, was like looking at the affordable housing that we have now and the apartments that we have now. And we were talking about like cliques and making everybody feel welcome. I'd like to hear what's happening now with those areas and how, I mean, do we have people who like come in and stay in apartments for a very long time in our community? Or do they come and go a lot? Is it more transient?
well, I think we have, recommending a housing study is something that we could do as part of the comprehensive plan. And that would allow us to get the data to be able to go to developers too, to say, here's what we know, and here are the demographics we see coming in terms of birth rates and whatever else, in terms of what the schools, what the schools are gonna look like.
Right, we try to predict like
You do
what
that
we're gonna
every
do.
day.
We do a census, we try to predict what the upcoming school population is gonna look like, but.
But how many neighborhoods already have like an association, have a neighborhood representative versus, apartment complexes that might not, that kind of thing, like that, I feel like that would, we could make that a goal.
The other thing I would say is I wouldn't suggest that just because you're putting affordable housing, you're going to increase population. Remember, it's seniors that are lacking.
Right, and that's where mine is.
So I would just say that when I say affordable or mixed use housing, it's creating more opportunities for people of different ages to be able to live within a community. So it doesn't necessarily mean a rise in population.
And there are so many, the accessory dwelling unit movement and the other things is another, there are these solutions that are emerging. So the accessory dwelling unit, we could work on our zoning to understand what our goals are around that. So that's like building like an in-law.
And I really would like to
Cabin.
see that, because I've said it many times, like we've run into with my mother-in-law, and there's no middle ground. Like they're at the point where they're still independent, so they want to have autonomy, but they're not quite at the point where they want to still take care of a whole house, but there's no other options. It's either liquidate all your assets and go into a certain level of step down, or you're spending everything with the hope that you're gonna like outlive or die before you outlive your money, which is a scary thing, I think, for so many older people who saved and done the right thing. But there are parts of the town, like where some school districts, the population is constantly, because birth rate is decreasing, is like decreasing. So we're kind of trying to think of outside of the box ways to keep those rates in certain schools higher, so you can consistently like have the staff and have, you know what I mean? So you guys might not necessarily be struggling with that, but other places around the town might be. Like, oh, it might be good to have a little bit of a housing boost so we have more kids in to.
And it just depends on the cycle, because
Right.
we closed the whole school not too long ago, and then we reopened it. you know, so
Having a
it's-
swing space in order to do the renovations and things like that is, it would have been probably a lot easier for the school district.
So for the sake of time, I'm gonna move forward, but these are all really great. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's
I
all
didn't mean to
right.
cut
I'm
you
just
off.
going back to what Heather, you said in the previous slide about that making sure like the transitioning of like an 18-year-old getting a job here. I think that affordable housing will be linked to them as well, to getting to stay within the community and having that mixed use like he was talking about. And even if you want to look at keeping quality teachers for our area and having affordable housing for them within our district would be a great mixed use of neighborhoods and promoting that affordable housing for them as well.
I just want to emphasize what Kay said, because we talked very briefly on, I think it was one slide ago, we just said, allow people to age in place. And that is a really huge problem in our community, and we glossed over it, but, you know, as a town entity, we're not going to say, okay, well, we're gonna open an elderly facility, we're not gonna do anything like that, but if we evaluate our regulations and really make that an action item to allow people to take care of their own family members, because I promise you, we will do a better job of taking care of our elderly than anyone else.
Right, I agree. I mean, we have like the complexes that are open, that no one, I mean, not very few people can afford that. And even just trying to like step down to a condo is more than their house is worth, you know, it's just, I can't imagine being 86 and having to take a mortgage out to be in like a smaller space just so I can stay around my family, to have those supports, you know?
And sometimes families leave because of that.
Oh, yeah, the whole
Families-
family.
The whole family will
Yeah.
leave because they have an elderly person that they don't want to put into a facility because the dangers of that are very real. And so I think that is something that we just briefly mentioned, but that should be a priority. It's very hard to get someone into a facility, even if that is an option anyways.
And you have one. John, did you want to say something?
No, I just wanted to.
Okay, all right. Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to move on to the next one, but those are all great action items. Feel free to comment those in the doc as well, though I've been writing them all down on my notepad as well. So the fourth policy area is diverse and local commerce. So again, rate your top 3. There's quite a few here. There's 7 different objectives in this area. And then we can talk about the one that's the least rated and see if we need some changes.
Oh, who came up with that one? I'll wait to talk about it. That one's awesome.
It's hard to pick 3 of these.
No, but the one with collaboration with school, university is
Oh, I mean,
beautiful.
yeah, I like that, but I like a lot of them too.
Same with me, like that one's just like,
That's good news. That's a good problem to have when we're doing this exercise.
Here we go.
yeah, I have to kind of refresh it.
So it looks like internship opportunities is being rated really high. Also providing resources for small businesses. Those, let's see, identifying market gaps. Local farming and food to table operations is being rated pretty high. I do see that establishing an identity for the town's commercial sector is not rated very high. I would be curious to know, do you just feel like that's not necessary? Is there something that would make you feel adverse to developing an identity for Manlius's commercial businesses?
I think our villages are really our commercial hubs, so
Okay.
it's sort of the same way that.
They kind of already have an identity.
They do, yeah. The way that Village of Fayetteville has, you know, Limestone Plaza and Top of the Hill Business District. And what would you say for the Village of Manoa, do you think? Like saying just Village of Manoa?
Trappers.
Yeah, Trappers, Charlie's, ice cream and Chinese food.
Do the businesses not feel like they're hurt or like that there is visibility? I mean, that must have been up there for a reason. So I was wondering if someone was talking to businesses and they felt like there's not visibility.
Well, in the town of Manlius, isn't it sort of got like Enders Road,
Yes.
you've
Yes.
got Core, you know, we
Yeah.
don't really have, we don't have names.
So I mean, I think Town Center has identity.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
Yeah.
you know, they've got identity and they're the biggest
Mhm.
commercial area. So I think if you're talking about retail areas, I think most retail areas have an identity. If you're talking about other kinds of businesses, I mean, you go out to Kirkville and there's some factory, you know, I
Yeah,
don't know
sure.
what they make out there, but they don't want an identity. They
They don't want it in that.
no, they're behind a gate. They don't even want you to come in,
Gotcha.
Whoa.
Okay.
I mean, we have never talked about cannabis, or maker spaces, or any of these things that are really popular in other places, or the fact that retail is gonna change a lot. And so, you know, maybe, like, I remember service merchandise from back in the day.
Oh, gosh. I
Right?
forgot about that.
And so like now this like idea of picking out a catalog or just picking up, or Amazon, or how Amazon's changing the landscape. So it's almost like, I don't really know if we're supposed to think about what we want. That seems like more important than trying to understand what's gonna happen with all the sectors in our plan. I don't know. I mean, the idea of how do we want to support as an entity, as a community, local businesses, I guess.
But if somebody wants, right, I don't know if somebody's you or the town board or 20 of us or 3 people that are very noisy at a meeting, and they pick the wrong thing and there's not a market for it.
Yeah.
And you've put all of your zoning and all of your planning board things towards this. You're not gonna have any commerce because that's not what is available.
Well, right now, we have affordable enough rents, right? Maybe for some businesses, but for newer businesses or for emerging businesses, like, that's the thing to think about. Sort of, do we want to make sure that, you know, right now, the people who can afford to build large scale businesses are like dentists and core development for retail, but the greater chamber of commerce in Manlius could tell us, you know, what other organized businesses would you know, want to come here. I don't know.
That brings up,
We have a hand raised, I think. Go ahead, Carrie.
That was from earlier. Sorry.
Okay.
I gotta-
I forgot to
So
take it down.
Carrie had come in and she just doesn't know when to pipe in because we're talking, so I just told her to use the raise hand
Yeah.
function, and John's gonna keep an eye out for that.
Oh, thank you for the help.
I got a question about the commerce because it got me thinking. Because if you call out areas that are commerce, that's good. And you know, there's certain areas that don't want to be called out. But I was just thinking about my son's orthodontist place just moved, right? And traffic is a huge problem. So if you can sort of, you know, congregate or make it attractive to have places congregate, then it helps you with your traffic, one would think. But, you know, I just think about these different doctor offices as they get larger and larger, and they only seem to be getting bigger and bigger. That creates its own traffic hub, but it also is a lost opportunity for a business to be next to it. For instance, if you take Enders Road, right? If my son's orthodontist business went and located in that plaza, instead of being a separate entity out in the neighborhood, you know, now you've got traffic going to those houses over by that neighborhood versus, let's say, that. So, you know, going to your point, it's like, how do you don't want to limit opportunities, but how do you create good opportunities?
So I think the phase, if you go back to the very beginning, we're gonna do a zoning phase. right
Yeah,
after
that would
this.
be that.
So keep those in mind in terms of having, I think maybe some amenities to support. I'm thinking of the place in Manlius that's the Seven Pines, but like there's a dentist in there too, you know. It's 3 or 4 businesses together in one driveway, and there's sort of amenities for them to be convenient and have only one driveway onto a busy street instead of 6, you know. So things like that would be ways to encourage
zoning.
professional business or a maker or a some kind of a crafter person to have a commercial space with some neighbors that are also commercial space, but also doesn't really bother the residential community behind it.
Yeah, like the Yard is a really good example, right? They have, you know, photographer and a bakery and some craftspeople and an event space and, you know, all in that former. Yeah, it's really neat. And so And then you've got Spill the Tea that opened up and has a yoga studio upstairs and there's an apartment and then the space downstairs. And so this idea of almost like housing, having a bit of an inventory that's like what stage of business is the space that we have available and what kinds of businesses.
Sorry,
There's this-
dinner. Didn't the yard close?
Yes, but it's reopening.
Oh, it is reopening, because I was gonna ask, like, is there
They had a
something?
hard time. Yeah, they had a hard time with the village on a couple of issues. Yeah.
Well, I
in
was
terms of-
wondering if I can't see what's that where the screen that's showing me, it doesn't show what we just went through, but I'm just wondering if we're missing something about bringing into the town. There's certain businesses that people are looking for that we just don't have.
Yeah, that was one of the objectives, was to
couldn't-
diversify the businesses in the town. And that came up in a lot of the focus groups too, especially with the youth focus groups we did, that came up several times. So
Yeah, I just remember when we started this whole process, you mentioned you did something, I want to say it was for Rochester, where you pulled from the town like the top 3 or, you know, what they were missing, and you picked the top 3 and you guys actually helped bring that business into that town. And I thought that was a really neat project.
And that's what I was gonna say is when we went to the high school, a large majority of the kids said they would like more diversity of like restaurants, specifically like right around us. They're like, you got pizza shops or Chinese, and like some of the kids and I was all for it. We're like, let's have a vegetarian. Like, I was like, that's awesome. And it was kind of out of the mouth of babes, right? Like things that they want. And you know that they're the ones, the big spenders of the teenage kids, because they get mom and dad, you know, kind of $20 and yeah.
And I will say, just to throw my 2 cents in there, as a small business owner, when I was first looking to open something in the area, I wanted to actually do a juice bar, but I was unable to because, well, the building that we have, what I would have to go through to get that up to code for, even though it wasn't food, it was it was just, I'm not cooking, it's not, but you have to have a grease trap and you have to have this. So it got me thinking that there's just not a lot of buildings that support that right now, that small, you know, one-off businesses can afford to open up. You know, I'm not a Chipotle or anything like that. So I had to pivot, but I wish there were more like sandwich spots and vegetarian restaurants and juice bars and stuff like that. But we don't have that building to support that.
And that's something that the town could have control and domain over. It's not necessarily like saying, oh, we only want this kind of business, but sometimes with, you know, I think that's something that the town would have a function of power to intercede and help with.
All right.
To facilitate.
let's move on to policy 5, just so we make sure we get through all of these. Responsive government operations. We have 5 objectives here.
Is yours moving?
I'm just lost. It's not-
A lot of words and that's what I.
There we go. Yes, mine's.
Now we go.
A lot of reading, sorry. These are all great comments though, and we've already discussed several different action items, so we'll be well on our way to revising this section and getting some good objective items down on the board. Okay, so let's see. Collaboration is being rated really high. Also fostering an environment that supports members of underrepresented community groups. Let's see. Soliciting community input is also being rated pretty high. Looks like technological upgrades is being rated the lowest. Is there a reason for that? Do you feel like that objective should be removed? Or is that maybe that's similar to the conversation we had on expanding internet access, where that might be more suited for an action item?
Yeah, it's more of a method to an outcome than an outcome in itself.
Okay.
I think you're right. It's a method like that would increase transparency of public meetings, for instance.
All right. And I'm actually going to skip forward just so we can make sure we get to the 6th policy area as well, but definitely leave comments in the document that we send out too, because we do want to collect your input on all of these in the way that they're worded. Do you feel like anything was missing? Anything glaringly missing? Nope.
I honestly think, town, for representation, let's make a ward system.
Yes.
Because a lot of people in the north end of town feel they aren't represented on the town board.
Yeah, I think that's actually very worthy of us looking
I
at.
think that's something we really need to look at.
What's a
Whether-
board
I'm glad you
system?
said
Can
that.
you
So,
clarify
like,
the
you
difference?
have a
between-
representative from Fayetteville, you have a representative from Manlius, and you have one from Minot, or you have, I mean, there's
Guaranteed
many
more
ways
than
to
an
do it.
at-large, so you can have, a total- you can have at-large members, but you're guaranteed different.
Almost like
Yeah.
districts.
I
Yeah,
Within the
love that
town, there's
idea.
districts, and each
That's
district
right.
needs. to be
And that's how the
represented.
county is set up.
And then
Right,
they would be
yeah.
part of the town,
Oh, it would be the town board.
Yes.
Yeah,
oh, it would be the town board and
just to
not,
ensure
Like
that
town of
there's equal
Salina is a board
representation.
district.
okay.
So do
Whereas
you-
here, it's just town councilors can be elected from any, they could all
Yeah,
come from
They
the
all
same
live
street.
right next door to
Right.
each other.
I think they have some
I
in
mean,
my
they
village,
could,
but
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay, I got
I
you
mean,
now.
theoretically, because you guys made an unpopular decision a couple
Mhm.
months ago, that whole neighborhood could run against them, you'd have one neighborhood on the town board. I
Mhm.
mean, theoretically, that's what
Right.
could happen.
So couldn't that be in this document?
No, I'm just saying theoretically.
No, I think-
I think that's a good point. Can they go here?
Thank you for saying that,
Yeah, I
because we've
think
been
it's-
talking about it, but I didn't think about putting it in here.
That's awesome.
So
I think that's a great
There's no
idea.
reason we're not to
So would
look
you
at
be
that.
looking to keep, like, in the system, would it be like there's wards, representatives, and then there are others that could come from anywhere?
Yeah, be at large.
Yeah, it's sort of like the city of Syracuse.
Yeah.
You have the city councilors, then you have two out-large
Oh, okay, got it.
positions. You can compare it
Then
that
that
way.
goes back into the,
That's a great,
the mission statement essentially about like inclusivity,
Mhm.
and
Actually, it
like
does.
everyone's being representative. And I think that, I love that everyone was like open to that. And I think that's the biggest thing I'm hearing, and I'm sure you're hearing the same thing, is like, we have no representation from our side, like
Mhm.
no one, like no one even cares what side of the political spectrum. We just want someone to be like, oh, I know where that is, that doesn't work. Or
Yeah.
like, you know what, like you feel like and you guys are awesome, and you're doing a great job being, communicating and doing the best you can. But if you don't have anyone from your side, like with miles and miles, or like, you just feel like you're kind of forgotten about, or the redheaded stepchild,
Yeah.
like it's.
I think it's important. I think it makes a lot of sense. And we have talked about it, so why not be clear about it,
Mhm.
especially if it's coming from representatives that are across.
And then
the
that
whole
goes back to the whole thing of transparency. I think you're going back to every single one of those strategic, like, mission statements and everything else, and it's all in line, which is what the purpose of this is to be. So that's awesome.
All right.
But the other thing I think, and I know I get bogged down on this, or I just think about Fayetteville or whatever, but when we were talking about, the town should be able to say, we want a juice bar. Well, where the town has retail opportunities is very limited,
Right.
because the village of Manlius is not gonna adopt necessarily what we're gonna do in the
Right.
town, nor is the Fayetteville, nor is Minot.
So it's a slippery
So,
slope.
I know, but
Right.
what I'm saying is, so the town could say, we want this, but the villages could say, okay, well then,
Sure.
go put it in the quarry up next to the new dentist's office.
Right,
But-
yeah.
We're not gonna give
But
you
we
any
could
spots in
help-
Fayetteville,
Right,
right?
but we could apply to the county for economic
And the
development grant
grants and
together.
things.
Well, that
That's
goes
what I'm saying,
to,
But now it's not gonna be next to anything.
And it takes
Now you
like
gotta
free
get
market. I
there.
get it. Like, I'm just trying to think of like,
but that was one of the objectives right in here, was the increased collaboration between the municipalities, which I think you're going towards, is so important.
Right, but I also think
Yeah.
as we're talking and we're coming up with
You
some
gotta
of these
realize-
ideas, we have to understand where does the
Yeah.
town
Right.
control and where do the villages
Control,
I mean,
yeah.
I think we, as a town, we have a responsibility to look at core and having that huge area, for example, and knowing that retail is changing.
Mhm.
And it was originally a mixed-use development
Mhm.
plan.
core.
Core is town center.
Oh,
And core
okay.
development has town center.
Thank
So
you.
all of those places, but like that, retail is changing. What do we do if suddenly there's a Hannaford grocery
mean,
store in the village and Tops is going under
Mhm.
and blah, blah, blah.
Which has already happened. I mean, the
Yeah.
mall's already died once.
Yeah.
It can happen
That was the
again.
tourist spot when I was growing up. Go to Camillus, go to the Fayetteville Mall, but
Wow.
And you keep forgetting that the town center is not the village.
Right.
Right.
That's what I find fascinating.
Yeah.
And almost should be incorporated part of the village, because then you could actually get sidewalks around it, but, right? I mean, it just doesn't make sense that that's not part
But
of
that's what I'm
the.
saying, you have these segments, and
Right.
and
I
it's
think
not
that's a-
like there's fences around them,
There
but
are.
the decisions we make,
Compartmentalized.
like you wanna make something that goes between Fayetteville and Manlius, right along FM Road. Well, there's only part of that that is in the town, the rest is in
I
Fayetteville
wonder if
or is
some-
in Manlius.
I think what you're saying is so powerful. I think almost a statement should be made in here somewhere that
you know, this is a town comprehensive plan. This is not stating what a village is doing. I think we need to, I think that's a great point.
All right,
Somewhere-
Grace, make a note of that.
It should almost be a footnote or something, so somebody doesn't read into this comprehensive plan and think, oh, wow, this is gonna change the
Yeah, we're
village. of
telling them,
Manoa.
no, what to
Right,
do
or
with that.
honestly, we could say like, we could have something here that's like dependent on village
Yeah,
participation.
Like a
right.
disclaimer.
But I think also just to facilitate that communication, to not assume that something's gonna happen.
Yeah.
I mean, the hope would be that we come up with something so
Yeah.
brilliant they couldn't turn it down.
But see, this is actually why I'm so excited that you're hosting this, an update on the comprehensive plan in the village, because honestly, and Sarah, you could do that maybe for the village of Fayetteville with Greg, because I think that, and we need Paul to do that for Manlius too, because we actually want to make sure we're caught up in what the comprehensive planning conversations are in the village at this stage of the game. We don't want to go so far. Yeah.
Okay. Some people have voted. It looks like some people have not.
Yes, so this is our last policy area, modern transportation networks. So we already have a couple of votes in here. If you haven't submitted them, we'll get those in and then we'll finish up with some next steps. So it looks like active transportation networks is voted pretty high. Also traffic mitigation strategies. I know that's something that we talked about actually through a couple of other policy areas as well. Let's see.
And we'll get more input for this when we do this sidewalk and greenways conversation.
Yes.
So there may be embellishments to this that we're just not aware of now.
I think B and C just go together. I think maybe the reason that I only voted for B and not C is because they seem linked. Like if you're going to establish and maintain that, it's already like covered by that.
Yeah.
Right.
I can't, I think C is so important. If you don't walk, I mean, having run into this recently where we had all snow, this was in the village of Janesville, I couldn't get from one side of the street to the other without crossing a huge snowbank in a darkly lit area, and I.
Even in a wheelchair.
Yeah, well, a wheelchair or just pedestrian, it's just not safe. I mean, geez, and look what happened in, what was it, what, the kid, that person that was just hit, that was jogging? You know, so I think these are important.
I think it's important to have a footnote or disclaimer, like I said before, about people not having to pay for it, and having, what did you call them, like tax?
Sidewalk districts.
Sidewalk districts, because that's a huge point. Everyone's up in arms, like, I'm not paying for sidewalks. We don't want sidewalks. We don't need them. We don't want to have to take care of them. Like none of those districts, none of the money from the one side that doesn't want it, doesn't make sense, should even have to take care of like the DPW aspect of the maintenance of the sidewalk. At least that's what
Well,
I'm
and I
hearing.
think
That's how
that
I feel.
And that's an accurate thing, is that if you do, so if you say, well, we, I don't know, we got grant funding or something, and so we're not gonna assign this to the homeowners, you're still paying the taxes for the
Correct.
DPW to take care of it.
Exactly, and that's why I wanted to
And
make
so-
sure, like, because that's one of those things, you know.
Yeah, looking at the burden of the long-term maintenance. At the same time, if there was a connective I don't want to say connective corridor and sound like SU because that was hotly contested, but if there was a connective corridor between like town center safely over to Manoa or their
The Erie
trailways.
Canal, like, I hate to be like a backwoods kind of person. I run on that thing every day. I make the kids walk on it. Like if you needed to get like footway, even if it's on a bike, if you needed to get from one side of town to the other, you could do it through the Erie Canal.
Yeah.
So I just like, our taxes are crazy as it is. And like, if anyone were saying, let's put more money, like, fine, we're getting
And
grants
that's
for the
already maintained.
sidewalks.
The Erie Canal's already maintained, so it's
Correct.
almost like, do I hear you saying it's important to have ways to get around, but it's also important not to build infrastructure that we have to maintain if
Right.
we could connect to infrastructure that is maintained.
Right, and I want to make sure that on there, because otherwise you're gonna have a whole bunch of people that are kind of up in arms with the sidewalk point, like I have been, and like I'm hearing, is that I understand where you guys live, you want them, and I would too, and I would want them maintained, because it's not just a one and done thing, it's like an upkeep cost. But I would definitely make sure that we write on there, like with a footnote, like, there will be districts, like, this is not, you know what I mean?
But I think there's also a way where, you know, not necessarily Burdick Street, but in a neighborhood, there's an advantage to not having sidewalks. It's a traffic calming to have a basketball hoop in the middle of the street.
Mhm.
You know, that's a sense of community. That's where the kids play with their neighbors. If you don't have that, you know, you don't have as much mingling, and you don't have all the dogs meeting each other and all that stuff that you get when you're just walking in the road.
Yeah. I mean, if I live in a neighborhood, I would want sidewalks. Like, I just don't feel safe with my kids walking not on a sidewalk. Like, I just feel like there's that security, but I'm just making sure that we're like, just footnoting, like asterisk districts are gonna meet the goals.
Yeah.
Yep, we can definitely include that. All right, are we ready to move on to next steps? I don't want to keep anyone past the end of this meeting. All right.
Are we done with this thing?
Yeah.
Yes, you can close the polling app. All of your answers are recorded, so I'm going to download all the data and I'll use that as we, revise the vision, policies and objectives sections. So thank you all. I hope that you liked the poll everywhere. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have any lasting thoughts on whether or not we should use that again. The next meeting will be on June 21st at 6:30 in person at Town Hall. And at that time, we will cover the revised vision policies and objectives, and we'll also come prepared with action items for you to take a look at as well, similar to what we did today. So again, we'll be revising this section based on the feedback we received tonight and also through your written comments as well.
I wanted to suggest that one is a little bit more celebratory too. Beginning of summer is a version of summer. So maybe bringing like, I don't know, Sarah's like, oh, I need to do that. But I think we have enough of a budget to give you like maybe a dinner, like give you dinner or something. So I'm pushing for that and I'll let you know, but
And I'm pushing against.
Yes, is everything okay with that?
Checks and balances.
Yeah. Anyway.
We're gonna get a vegetarian, I would love that if we had like some, person come in and do it. Vegetarian business opportunity.
Yeah.
Juice shop.
Featuring, I'll check in. We'll see if we can make it less resource intensive for the sponsor.
So you will be receiving a link from me with a way to access the draft vision policies and objectives. It'll be through Adobe Acrobat Online. If you haven't used it before, don't worry, you just need the link. And when you click on it, you'll go to the document and you'll see some tools up there where you can drop a comment or you can highlight text, you can, cross it out, you can use a marker and draw, and we'll all be able to see each other's comments too. So definitely feel free when you use this link to read through the comments that are there from other committee members. You can post replies, say which ideas you agree to or not. And then we'll use that feedback to revise this draft section and present the next draft to you all. If you have any trouble with the online link, don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. You won't have to create an account or anything, so I'm hoping it'll be pretty seamless for you all. And then lastly, before we sign off tonight, I just wanted to mention that we plan to incorporate a lot of graphics and photos in the plan, and with the weather turning nice, we would love to get some great photos of the community to incorporate into the plan. You might have noticed we've been repeating some photos. We definitely want to freshen up the plan, especially in this vision section, so that we can have some up-to-date photos to present. So if you are interested and would like to have any of your photos included in the plan, please send them to me. You all have my email address. Specifically, we're looking for photos of significant buildings and places or areas that you think are key concern or an opportunity for the town. Photos of community events are always a great thing to include, or signage. So thinking about, town of Manlius signs and school district signs, those types of things. So we will have our own photos to include in the plan, but again, the more the merrier. So if you have any that you think would be great to include, feel free to send those along to me through email. And any questions before we sign off for the night?
I want to thank everybody for participating. And this was I personally like the polling as a method of getting the conversation going. So I thought it was fun.
Good.
And I hope that everybody had a good time and that you felt that your comments were validated and recorded adequately. So.
Thank you so much.
Yes, if you feel like we didn't get to talk about something that was important to you, please include it in the written comments in that Adobe Acrobat Online, or feel free to shoot me an email too. If you don't want your comment to be visible to everyone, you can also email me as well.
Thank you for being with us through the long haul of this too. I mean, I feel like the one of the reasons I'm pushing for food is that I want us to get to keep trusting each other and working with each other and learning. And I really think that I feel grateful for your participation, and I know we all do that. So thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity for like open dialogue where, yeah, it's so important.
It's like, we're gonna hold my,